All right, so welcome back to Lecture 2.4 in our ongoing online series in Cognition. We're going to do a pretty brief run through auditory perception. Just talk about a few issues that I think are of interest and importance. Looking into the primary interest in auditory perception, of course, we talk about tone and the things we hear best. Primarily, we're tuned to hear the human voice pretty well. From a cognitive perspective, of course, we perceive language in this way. But just to give you a quick hit on something that I think is kind of important from perspective of human performance is sound localization. How do we know where something comes from or where a sound is coming from? This, of course, has important survival implications. Knowing where a sound is coming from can tell us where danger might be, so it's particularly important. So the way we localize sounds has really a lot to do with how slow sound is compared to vision. Light, of course, travels at 186,000 meters per second. Sound travels in the miles per hour range, the 700-ish miles per hour, depending on local conditions, humidity, atmospheric pressure, etc. But because it travels so slowly, we can actually process the temporal difference between one ear and the other, and we call that the intraoral time difference. So the way this works is, as a sound is traveling towards us, we can actually provide some information about where that sound is coming from based on if it's hitting the right ear or the left ear. And of course, as we move our head up and down and from side to side, that can give us both elevation, azimuth, and distance. So the way we tell primarily where a sound is coming from is from the intraoral time difference. And so the time it takes for a sound to reach one ear versus the other. So in this particular diagram, stimulus A, this is going to be difficult for us to exactly localize because the sound is striking both ears at the same time, which if it's of a particular frequency, it could also be directly behind us, which can lead to some difficulties, but only certain frequencies. It's one of the functions of your pinna, which is the external part of your ear, is to block some sounds, certain sound frequencies, so you can more localize them. You'll also notice animals in particular will oftentimes move their heads, tilt their heads, or in the case of some animals like my corgi, they'll actually move the pinna of one ear in one direction so as to get a better localization of that sound. One of the important components of this is we can only localize medium to high frequency sounds. The reason for that is very low frequency sounds have sound waves that are bigger than our heads. And so you can see at the bottom of this figure, those sound waves are actually striking on either side of the head. And as a result, we can't tell the difference in time because it's only striking one ear or the other. And so we have no idea where that sound is coming from. Whereas higher frequency sounds, we can actually tell where they're coming from. This becomes important from an applied perspective because this can tell us a lot about doing things like setting up a home theater system. Many of you will have a sub-woofer at home, which creates low frequency sounds. That can be placed anywhere because we don't know where those low frequency sounds are coming from. You can put it in the back, in the front, doesn't matter. We can't tell where those sounds are coming from. Whereas the higher frequency sounds, which is what those rear speakers in most sort of traditional surround sound systems are doing, is they're producing those higher frequency sounds. And so this tells us how we localize those sounds and how to set up those systems. The other important thing about this is how low of a sound you can localize depends on the size of your head. So the bigger the head you have, the lower the frequency sound you can localize because your ears are further apart, and as a result, the sound waves that will hit both ears with the time difference are actually longer, and so you can actually localize longer sounds, lower frequency sounds, if you have a bigger head. Couple of things about auditory perception to quick talk about. Auditory attention, we can direct our attention to specific sounds. We're going to visit this in the next module when we talk about attention. In particular, we can select one sound out of the environment, like one person's voice, to pay attention to and try to block out the others. This gets more difficult as we get older, and certainly the more noisy it gets, but we can do that. There are also top-down influences in auditory perception. We'll oftentimes misperceive what somebody says because of what we expect. We also sometimes will hear things in expectation of them happening. So, back when phones actually rang, we would get out of the shower to answer a phone that wasn't ringing because of these sounds in that shower are pretty close to the sounds of a ringing telephone. And this happens in particular when we're expecting an important phone call, or we're expecting someone to call. We'll hear that phone ringing when it actually isn't. And again, in language processing, this happens all the time. We hear what we expect, and we mishear because of what our expectations are. Some other areas in which that same kind of top-down processing occurs are all of our other senses as well, in particular touch. So while in our modern context we don't get out of the shower to answer a phone, but I guarantee almost all of us have pulled our phones out because we thought we felt it vibrate. So that touch illusion, we're expecting a text or a phone call, can drive that as well. And I'm sure many of you are like myself, that you feel your phone vibrate in your pocket, and it's not even in your pocket. And that is a top-down illusion from that expectation. Taste is another one. Vision and taste go hand in hand. And so our perception of taste is oftentimes tied directly in with our visual perception and what we expect something to taste like, which is why we oftentimes don't like certain colors in our food or what we might expect it to taste like. And so those are tied together. And then finally, our vestibular system, or our balance and orienting system, also has some top-down effects. In particular, our visual system helps calibrate our balance and orienting. And so we can get tricked into feeling like we're moving because of some sort of visual stimulus. So for example, if you're on the metro and the train right next to you starts to move, you may believe that you're moving when in fact it's the other train that's moving. Similarly, if you expect the train to move or don't expect it to stop, you can get caught off balance because of that expectation. So I encourage you to look through these summary questions at home and these review questions. And these are some of the important terms, though not all of them, from this particular module up until now. We're going to finish out perception by looking at the neuropsychology of human perception, in particular some issues called agnosia and prosopagnosia in our final lecture in this particular module.